Jamie, thanks for joining us on the DevReady podcast. Jamie's from Mogul. He's a Chief Product Officer. Wanted to get him in really to talk about what it's like developing a product within a startup framework and environment. Thanks for joining us, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Tell us a bit about who you are, what your background is, and how you originally got involved in technology.
My career path, the trajectory, looks a little bit odd maybe at first glance, but the overriding theme is generally emerging technology and emerging industry and thinking about what's next. But let's start at the beginning, I suppose. Look, as a young kid, just really loved video games. Only child, was always lonely, and so multiplayer games were sort of always high on my priority list. That led me to the world of PCs. This brand new thing called the internet was taking off, and I was just desperate to get online and play multiplayer games. So I talked my parents into buying me my first computer, Pentium 233.
Your first sale?
Yeah, that's right. 32 megs of video RAM. It was pretty flash at the time. And well, of course, I told them I needed it for school, right? I needed it for research, but really, I just wanted to play Quake and Command and Conquer.
Nice.
So I started building PCs, and I was just fascinated with the opportunity of getting content online and it being available to the world basically immediately, right?
Yes.
The democratization of information dissemination, like the next printing press, that sort of leap, and that was really exciting. And of course, I didn't think about it in those terms back then. I didn't have the vocabulary, but fundamentally, intrinsically, that was what excited me. And so I started teaching myself how to write HTML. I was using Microsoft Front Page actually as a WYSIWYG, and then reverse engineering it and looking at what code it was spitting out to understand how it was generating what I was building.
Very nice.
A little bit of PHP and a little bit of Java and a little bit of CSS and some CGI scripting and this sort of stuff. And then I decided that, obviously I needed to try and make these things a bit prettier as well. So I taught myself how to use CorelDRAW, and then it was PaintShop Pro and eventually Photoshop. And, now there are a dozen better design tools. And that was sort of the beginning of everything. I started freelancing. I started, doing some design work and some web builds for small businesses around the territory in South Australia. But gaming was still sort of, at the heart of everything. I mean, part of the reason that I did that was to create a presence for my clan. I'd started a Quake World team, and I wanted to represent them.
First website
you
built.
That's right. First website was actually a clan website. And I ended up doing some design work for EA Games and Microsoft Games, and working on Telstra Game Arena, which was formerly Wireplay, and their COGS application, and all a long time ago now. A long time freelancing. Got a good break as creative director at Tats Group, which is New South Wales Lotteries, Tats Lotteries, those guys. And then that turned into a head of user experience role. Moved on later in my career to the AFL as head of user experience there, and then really sort of got back into startup land rather than working for big businesses. I guess almost a throwback to my time as a freelancer, managing distributed teams, where I would sort of wrangle up a bunch of designers and developers to work on a project with me. But now very, very product focused as opposed to services focused. Was one of these startups which I co-founded, and we were working on a transit application similar to Citymapper, and underpinning that application was some novel technology which I'd submitted a patent for, which was in essence the opportunity for someone with a mobile phone to be able to engage with an out-of-home screen, a digital out-of-home screen, DOOH as the industry sort of acronym goes, but without needing to pair, without needing basically any friction. And we accomplished this with a novel arrangement of proximity-based beacons, Bluetooth beacons, and creating a link between the two, so that the device would figure out which screen it's next to, and it would make some calls to a server to understand what content was currently playing on that screen, and then it would be able to service content related to whatever's on that screen.
Get it?
So actually pretty simple when you water it down, but a pretty big deal for the industry, and that technology has gone on to see a lot of acclaim. After Contact Lite, The next major project was Horizon State, which
Yes.
you're familiar with, which was the world's first blockchain voting solution, using distributed ledger technology to create a perfectly secure, auditable, transparent, safe and cheap record of a vote, which has a lot of tremendous knock-on effects, positive knock-on effects for not only our national budget, being able to run, for example, the same-sex marriage plebiscite for $1 million instead of $120 million.
That's a big difference in numbers, isn't it?
It's,
Yeah.
absolutely. But also, really important knock-on effects for developing nations and those where sometimes it's not so safe to go to a place of polling, right? There's violence and there's a lot of corruption, and so this provided the opportunity for us to move the needle there as well by making it safer and keeping people accountable. And look, really, probably more proud of that piece of work than anything I've worked on. There's these light bulb moments throughout life, and I've had some great ideas and worked on some of these great ideas, but that for me is probably the most special because it meant the most. It's the most profound. It had the greatest opportunity for impact, for change. And yeah, look, as you mentioned, currently at Mogul, which is Australia's first listed esports business, we build basically infrastructure to support the rapidly growing esports competitive landscape, basically tools for tournament creation.
Yeah, nice.
Online prizing, this sort of stuff, which is really fun. Back to my gaming roots again.
It's amazing how much of your early story lines up with mine. I even went into the games programming at uni, and then we started our startup, which we've been doing since then. But it was very similar into games, learning front page, HTML, Corel, Draw, 3D, then Photoshop.
Nice.
Yeah, very basic understanding to get you through. But yeah, it's amazing how then it just diverges separately. You've had multiple startups and different levels of success along the way.
Yeah, I mean, look, as we were discussing earlier offline, startup. I love startup life. The flexibility, the control. More often than not, it's the opportunity to work on passion projects with people that are just super motivated. Really intelligent, passionate, hardworking people who share the vision. And sometimes that's hard to find in big corporate environments. And even when you do find those sort of people in big corporate environments, there's usually a lot of bureaucracy and red tape which slow things down. So early stage businesses thinking about technology, emerging technology, helping devise new solutions, create better solutions to old problems. This is what I find fun, but of course there's a lot of risk involved, both from a capital perspective, from a job security perspective. A lot of these startups just don't work. The attrition rate is high because not every idea can succeed.
Yeah.
And you sort of touched upon, so you went from tech, like building tech, to UI. What was that decision, and why did you go into that more UX, user experience side? What drew you to that?
When I was building those websites in the early days, it became very apparent that it didn't so matter much how good I was at building something if I was building the wrong thing.
Yes.
And so very quickly I became fascinated with behavioural psychology and trying to understand why what I built was resonating or working or not.
Okay.
And that's more a design problem than anything else. The technical implementation, how you go about executing, that can be achieved masterfully for both good and bad solutions. And
Yes,
so
correct.
I really wanted to focus on first and foremost the right solutions, and that really led me down the path of design thinking and user experience.
It's good that you had that realization very early.
Yes.
It took us a while to get there as well. So yeah, it doesn't matter how good you build it, having that if you build it, people will come mentality doesn't get you anywhere.
That's right, yeah.
So the behavioural science side, dive into a little bit on that. So what have you found over your journey around what works, what doesn't? So what are some things that people can think about?
Look, I think lowest common denominator is unfortunately very important. It's about, first and foremost trying to establish a very rich understanding of your audience. If you're building product without, going to market and trying to understand your target market, or first establishing truly what that is, otherwise product market fit's going to be really, really hard. But once you have, making sure you're doing appropriate amounts of research, things as simple as surveying, but generally in product and digital product, sentiment can be misleading, opinions can be misleading. The most valuable sort of trials and tests you can run about understanding the preference and behavior of your potential target market is things like usability testing, where really what you're doing is understanding behavior. You're looking for what they do, not what they say they do. Really, that's what it comes down to.
And I think, you've touched on that. So we can run up with a survey and basically ask a few questions, but that doesn't then generally mean they're going to use your application at all. The challenge you have when you're in a startup world to get the usability testing, that can mean some significant investment. So where do you see drawing the line from that? How far do you take it to get the usability? Do you need a full-fledged product? Where do you see the first testing starts?
Look, there's some really simple, lo-fi, cost-effective stuff you can do, which is still just better than asking people their opinion. This is, as simple as paper prototyping, literally scribbling down some UI on paper and rocking up to your local coffee shop and asking people whether they'd basically take this quick test with you in exchange for a free cup of coffee. It's going to cost you $3. It's going to take them 2 minutes. You really want to basically pretend that they're using a real product, but they're not. And as simple as if you wanted to update your account details across these 3 scribbles, which buttons would you click on? It's a crude example, but it's absolutely practical and it helps a lot.
Because you have to get away from people telling you what you want to hear. And then,
right.
Surveying a group of people that are all very similar, that will provide similar answers as well.
Confirmation bias and that willingness to have your own passion and belief reinforced is an easy trip.
Especially in startups, I've found as well. People just discard the opinions of other people who don't agree with them, and then if these people have said it's going to work, so we'll go down that path. And ignore the others because they believe in it.
And it's tough, because most founders will get criticism for their ideas, about those ideas, in more than one forum. Usually when they're seeking investment, there's just a lot of no's. It takes a certain degree of intuition, maybe something which can't really be trained or taught, to understand what advice to be taking, what criticism to be accepting, what praise to be accepting, and what not to. I think there's just a matter of judgment there, which is, it's not really something where you can say this is how you make better decisions about feedback. So it's a tough one to answer, but certainly people need to remain, I think, as conscious. And as accepting and as open-minded about the potential for feedback, and just thinking really critically about what feedback they're accepting, what feedback they're paying attention to, because sometimes you go against the grain and you get nothing but no's and criticism, and it turns out to be a tremendously good idea. And Airbnb is a fascinating example of this, which is heralded as the worst idea that ever worked because they really struggled, and nobody thought it was practical. Nobody thought it would ever be entertained. By a consumerist capitalist population. Like, why would I have a stranger stay in my spare room?
Get it.
But it's all just part of that broader sort of kind of sharing economy in a way, which has emerged, and it's really exciting. And those sorts of ideas, they actually go on to change culture. They change, the human condition and the fabric of society. A lot of people talk about how we're becoming a little bit more antisocial. I actually see the exact opposite. I think anecdotally you can pretend we're becoming more antisocial, but we're now happy to get into cars with strangers, Uber.
Think about that. It has changed.
Strangers,
I think it was that way. I think you think back 100 years ago, people they would say they're more social and connected and willing to talk to a stranger, and I think that changed and shifted, but it seems to be coming back that way now, which is great for everybody.
Just in that time, a stranger was the guy you saw down the street.
Correct.
Now it's anywhere in the world. So we are more connected, but...
And being a gamer, spending a lot of time online, I've made some of my best friends lifelong friends, people who I now see IRL, quite often. But that indeed copped a lot of criticism for a long time and still does. But because we are so connected, we are the most social that any generation has ever been. And of course, it's a different kind of socializing, right? But that's also not a bad thing. I think people are just kind of resistant to change. In that, give us 50 to 100 years, and we won't need to be having this conversation verbally. We'll be exchanging ideas via thought, and that's just a different kind of communication. Right?
It's a different take on it, because a lot of people just talk about we're not as social as we once were, but how social were we really? I think we, as things change, we don't really associate to the past, and we say, okay, we used to make phone calls, used to go for coffee, we used to do this, that, but how often did we really do that? I think it's easier to say that was better than it is now, and I think we get a little bit lost in that. So it's an interesting take, because a lot of people just say, yes, we aren't as social, but when you look at it, it's a different way.
They're very similar, just the terms have changed. The coffee and the talk is now Netflix and chill.
That's right. 100%.
That's very, very cool. So let's jump a little bit into, obviously you were in corporate world, so let's not go too far there, but let's jump into the startup. So Horizon State's clearly one that we know a little bit about. Let's talk a little bit about how that sort of evolved, how you got involved in the Horizon State, and how you took what you knew from a corporate world into a startup, which really, I don't think, from what I know, it wasn't your concept. You came into that project. How did you see that?
So, look, my experience at Tats Group was priceless. I mean, at Tats Group, we were kind of building out a startup within a very large institution, and that gave us some flexibility and some liberty, which a typical startup wouldn't be afforded. But as an example, we were a separate entity so far as business registration is concerned. We were a subsidiary of Tats working within the walls of Tats, and so we were given permission to move fast, at least early on, and build out a big team with kind of like an unlimited budget. We were drawing on the profits from the large business. While trying to do things such as, deliver the company's first mobile app. It was 2009 when I started working for Tats, and the iPhone had been around a couple of years, and it was time to start thinking about it. So a lot of learnings there in terms of team building, in terms of deploying emerging technologies to markets that aren't necessarily that savvy in respect to that technology. And so that, look, in a nutshell, that was massively beneficial. And so moving on to future opportunities, using that as ammunition, it really helped me create the best possible starts for some of these small businesses, which obviously had far more limited budgets. But on the topic of Horizon State specifically, I joined a not-for-profit democratic movement called MyVote, spelled MIVOTE. And the premise of MyVote was that rather than waiting for an election every few years and then voting for a package of policies, or unfortunately, as most of the populace does, they vote for personalities or parties rather than even the package of policies. And we wanted to try and think about ways to enable any constituency to have their voice heard in a more frequent manner, voting on perhaps a per policy basis where they had the interest or the knowledge to actually learn up and have their say and influence that outcome in between election cycles. When I joined, there wasn't really any concept for how this would be delivered, but it was clear that it needed to be internet-based because standing up, polling stations every week or every month or every few months was just completely, an untenable idea and just too cost ineffective and just not very efficient. It was around the same time that I'd been dabbling in Ethereum. I missed the Bitcoin wave, but I'd been reading a lot about Ethereum and had been subsequently reading a lot about distributed ledger technology. And it seemed to me that this could be potentially a very, very good application for digital voting. In that, if you think about a Bitcoin, and if I'm to transact with you and send you part of a Bitcoin, well, there's a confidence that transaction is immutable, it's irreversible, it's perfectly transparent and audible. It's basically all of the things that would make a fantastic vote, right? And based on the technology that all this is built upon, it's yet to be compromised. And I think the only real risk in regards to it being compromised is quantum. But of course, everything is potentially compromised.
That changes everything.
And of course, people see, this exchange has been hacked or someone lost some Bitcoin. But fundamentally, what we're seeing is the erosion of centralized services in terms of their security practices and processes. We're seeing centralized services being compromised, not the blockchain itself, right? And so, that's sort of how it all began. We lent on some third-party help and got a prototype sort of built out within just a few months, and it was a proof of concept that worked. And so we were pretty chuffed. The idea had legs. It was proven viable. And we spun out the technology into a business called Horizon State, whose intention was to take it global and to commercialize it. And ended up working with small councils in New Zealand and South Australia, and had great conversations with national governments, Gibraltar and Afghanistan. Travelled the world in a very short amount of time during that sort of crypto blockchain boom. But it was all very exciting, and as I said, very proud of that work because the precedent that we set, we sort of really started this idea that maybe online voting can begin to happen in places outside of Estonia, which is more or less the only place in the world doing it right now.
I didn't even know that fact, but clearly you would.
So we, I feel like it's remarkable to be a part of something that important, that special.
Why do you think Estonia is the only one doing online voting right now?
Well, because look, inherently it's insecure, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's digital voting on machines or whether it's online voting, the infrastructure which underpins that communication just isn't up to task. It doesn't provide the right degree of confidence that we aren't going to make it easier for people to manipulate outcomes, where blockchain changes that.
In terms of the blockchain, you're obviously trying to make a massive change here. So you're going into talking to governments around taking voting, one, online, and then two, bringing this whole new technology and educating them around blockchain. How did you find that approach, being a startup, trying to make this massive change? Because we're not talking about a startup that's trying to make a little impact here. Yeah. One that's trying to deliver significant change across the globe in the way we perceive how we vote and how we actually do run democracy.
And using a technology that most people think is a fad or a bubble and not have a real use.
Look, immensely challenging is the short answer. Look, I think in many ways, we were the first. We were leading edge with this idea. So, the common phrase about timing is everything in startup land.
Yeah.
Look, arguably, I think when I started that journey 4 or 5 years ago, it was too early. And that was reflected in many conversations. I mean, look, government moves really slow by default. And so when you take really slow moving institutions and you want to push them into innovation with technology which is either not understood whatsoever yet or maybe doesn't have the appropriate amount of testing and DD completed from their perspective, thinking about their risk, what they take on by adopting certain new technologies, and then thinking through the behaviour change for the constituency. There is a whole lot of factors there which are just real tough. Like they're things that which you're talking about a journey which probably needs to take decades rather than just a few years before it becomes well and truly a reality in all of the places you want it to. So, I'm a firm believer that this kind of technology will be used precisely for those purposes, but we won't see, large national elections using it probably still for another 5 to 10 years, I'd say.
Okay.
I'd say could be even more potentially.
It's an interesting conversation. So, and I think it alludes to the fact of if you're a non-tech looking to build some technology, understand what challenges you might have in the market, trying to make an impact like you were. I think, understanding what the regulation is, what the type of people you're dealing with is, and understanding the industry. How did you go about that? Was the thinking just the tech's that great and the idea's that great, we'll be able to do this? What was the initial thinking behind it?
Well, look, I go into all of these ideas understanding that they might just fall over. They might not work, right? It could be the greatest idea. The technology could be the best. And sometimes it just doesn't work. Timing is probably the biggest factor there. I think it's Mark Andreessen, creator of Netflix, who famously said that every idea that failed during the dot-com boom and bust would now work. It's always a matter of timing, and so I go into these projects understanding that I'm going to try and take a stab at something which I obviously believe is viable, and we can make this fly, it can succeed.
Yes.
But you've got to go in also appreciative that it might just not work. And so, look, I mean, in respect to co-founders who are non-technical, I think you're right. It's usually a benefit rather than a detriment, but you've got to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and doing the best possible job at communicating and educating and hand-holding. Sometimes this can be a little bit frustrating, but more often than not, they bring essential skills to the table which a technical co-founder or even a user experience and design co-founder might not. So those complementary skills are really critical. I generally have a rule of thumb that in most startups, you want a gun designer, a gun developer / programmer. You need basically a gun sort of BD.
Yes, someone that you can talk the talk,
that's
communicate
right.
out there.
Those those are really the three essential things. You need the guys that can build the thing, and you need the guy that can take it to market. And very, very quickly after that, you'll start to look at what is very specifically, marketing muscle and this sort of stuff, right? But even in the early days, depending on what the model is and what the product is, you don't necessarily need that sort of CMO type figure to get going. And I mean, look, in terms of practical, actual experience, my current role at Mogul as Chief Product Officer is working with another three very successful, very intelligent individuals. One of them actually comes from a financial services background and made a fortune playing online poker.
That's an interesting background.
We have another person from media and sports.
Yes.
We've got another person from the world of games publishing, so very much in the video games industry, but not necessarily involved in esports, despite having launched some of the world's biggest esports titles. But it's a great mix of knowledge, and that's important. So I'm happy to be able to bring to the table first-hand experience, being sort of semi-pro. I played for Australia's best Counter-Strike team once upon a time.
Okay.
Awesome. But also having that sort of technical leadership background and hands-on user experience design. It's complementary, and I think that's an essential part of seeing success in any startup. Because if you're missing a great developer, or you're missing that great designer, well then the product is basically compromised. And if you don't have somebody who can talk the talk, walk the walk, take it to market, do the deals basically, or think about go-to-market strategy and think about marketing in the right way, again, it's the comment you made earlier. You can't just build it and expect people will come. There's more to it. Peter Thiel, obviously famous investor in Facebook, he doesn't even necessarily believe strongly in you need to be 10x better than your competitors to succeed. He's a big believer in build a great product and then take it to market stronger, market it better.
Market it better than your competition.
Pretty much, like in essence, and it sounds crude, and this is only, I guess I'm taking his perspective slightly out of context, but if you can spend more on marketing than your competitors, and you have otherwise, a pretty even product, then you're going to win.
It all comes down to marketing dollars and how well you build your brand in the end. Because I think people get a little bit lost on, let's just build the tech, and like I said, hopefully they come. But in reality, there are more than likely, if you're building technology, I was on a conversation with a guy that supports SaaS products, and he said there's minimum 9-10 SaaS products within a competing market of yours. So what's your point of difference? In reality, from a feature and function set, you're going to have some similarities clearly across that. Your difference is how you market it and how you service that product. So it's a very interesting conversation around what do you do differently. I think marketing brand is still pivotal, and then how you niche your market as well in terms of who you're communicating to.
Correct. I mean, you just can't understate the importance of how you take the product to market. I mean, in any business, of course, you're going to be striving for 10x improvements over the status quo. Of course, you're going to be looking for features that differentiate and give you an edge in the market against your competitors. Obviously, you'll do those things. But even those things unto themselves, even if those are reasons for long-term success. If you want to pour fire, if you want to pour accelerant on that fire and really get it going quicker, well then you still need to think about money spent, how you spend it in terms of marketing, and also which markets. Mogul has a few high-quality competitors. In fact, there's a couple solid pieces of technology businesses that are up and running and doing well. And so for us, obviously we've got some really exciting stuff which is about to drop, which will give us an industry lead. But we aren't expecting that industry lead all of a sudden makes us the industry leader, right? We have to think about where we take that technology, into which markets, at what time, how much we're spending. This is all really essential stuff, because having the best tech more often than not isn't enough alone.
And we're sort of finding that with our retail product that we have at our other startup. It's very similar to the competition that's out there. We came late onto the market compared to them, but the message that we have and the extra services such as the support that seem to be making the difference and resonating with the users more.
So sometimes not just about the tech at all. So I think you touched on it there. You're going to have now, but it's about timing too then. So if you're building and launching some new tech that's going to be different and differentiate you, that's not going to last forever either.
Correct.
Unless you've got some real patterns behind that and they can't touch it. But in reality, you can shift and twist a few things and all of a sudden you get something very similar. So then you need to have the marketing budget and the capital to actually push that out, especially if you're playing a big game. So Mogul, what are the plans for Mogul? How big is the team right now? What are you looking to do? How have you brought the team together? What does it all look like?
Look, the business has been around for a few years now.
Okay.
The product's been up and running for about 1.5 or 2 years.
Okay.
I've been with the business for about a year. So I was brought on around this time last year to really rethink parts of the product and also help rethink some of the strategy for commercialization and how we take this product to market, for what purpose, for which audience.
Okay.
It wasn't immediately apparent to me what the right decisions would be, and it's part of the reason that I love being involved in startup as a full-timer, committed to the brand, committed to the idea, committed to the product. Because as a consultant, which I've spent some time in, mind you, you're going out to businesses and in a very condensed amount of time, somehow you need to figure out the entire business and all of its nuance and then make the right decisions for the future of the business, which is way harder than anybody actually ever acknowledges.
Yeah, correct.
And I think more often than not, consultants are making ultimately what are... let's just call them less than optimal, decisions for the business based on that toughness of time. So the first few months at Mogul was learning a lot, while also starting to plan out what things might look like from a product perspective, and what our priorities are from a feature set and from an acquisition strategy perspective. Now those things are finally in full swing. We've got a really, really exciting roadmap ahead of us with a world first and industry first piece of tech, which is indeed a patentable opportunity, which I'm super hyped about. We'll get to talk about that more over the next few weeks to month. But in essence, look, in a nutshell, we're looking to be the world's best from a technology perspective. But right now, there's an incredible focus also put on which markets we're entering and when and how, and thinking about the competitive landscape, where purposely avoiding some of the markets where our competitors are strong, and looking at some of the markets which they're not. So for us right now, South America and Southeast Asia and India are all enormous growth opportunities because they're underserved in terms of this infrastructure, and we're already there. We have thriving communities playing on our platform, creating events, hundreds of people rolling through the door for matches, and that's going to be a key focus for us moving into the rest of 2020.
That was a good point you made there. So if you are in a market that's, obviously you've got competition, I think you touch upon it, finding a market they're not serving well enough, or something you can niche into, and you've obviously got a location-based sort of target there in terms of countries and particular continents you're targeting. But if you're a non-tech, you can focus on a niche. It could be an industry that's not getting served well with a particular type of product.
That's
so
right.
It's a valid point in terms of how you actually build your strategy behind it. So with the strategy, you obviously come from a UX. Horizon State, you probably looked at more learning around how you roll out a product, and especially understanding the landscape. What do you look at when you're diving into the strategy and how to market a product, and what's important? What do you believe is important in that area?
I guess at its core, these are still kind of, in a way, all user experience questions, right? They're design questions, in that thinking about the markets we're leading into, and it's already been revealed through some actual usability testing, is that expectations are different market to market.
Okay.
I think localization and experience adaptation based on those locales is often something that's overlooked. There's a massive marketplace in Japan, which just most recently, it's gone against what I'm about to say in some ways, but Rakuten used to have not only localization in terms of language, being able to visit it as a Westerner and seeing it in English versus being a local in Japan and seeing it in Japanese, but the entire experience would shift in pretty significant and stark ways. The Japanese site looked like a busy newspaper, and the Western site like a beautiful Apple advertisement.
Yeah, interesting.
And this is quite smart in the sense that you have to do different things in different markets to establish credibility. The Japanese prefer things typically that are information dense. They like to be educated and believe that they have all the right information before making a purchase decision, as an example. Whereas the West tends to be a little bit more enamored by bright and shiny objects and one-word slogans and these kinds of things. And so I think that's probably most often the most overlooked aspect
Yes.
to pushing product into various new territories. And ideally, you'll create some kind of universality, because otherwise the burden and the debt builds up way too fast in terms of, basically having 6 different products for 6 different markets.
It's challenging, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
to manage that.
But I think if you can think beyond just language, create universality to the best of your ability. But if there's an opportunity to make changes or create points of difference for different markets, where the research suggests you should, the rewards for that are usually quite great.
Okay, well, that's an interesting take, because a lot of people can build a product and put it out into many markets and leave it exactly as is, and you find you might hit with one market and not others. And I think that goes with any sort of communication. We want to know who our customer is. We want to know what they're attuned to buying, what their interests are, and what sort of needs they have. And you said the Japanese site's got a lot more content and more like a newspaper. They like a lot of content-rich stuff and probably some more rich imagery, I imagine, on that side as well.
It's a cultural thing you have to understand, not just be able to have it translatable, which is
it's all well and good to
most people think of.
Yeah, that's right. It's all well and good to say, well, look, my product's digital. We distribute it over the internet, so it's just global immediately, which is true, right? But it's true in the crudest sense, in that without appropriate localization, language is a baseline. But going beyond that and thinking about what actual patterns might need to change, how might the feature set differ to cater for local interests and local expectations. That stuff can be massively valuable. In some cases, it's just not that important, in that we're just going to make it available globally, but really our target markets are X, Y, and Z anyway.
Yeah, get it.
But if there's a business interest in a certain region, it pays to go and do that legwork to do the research.
Yeah, it's very smart. So, and the same would be per industry and per user type as well. That's right. You've obviously got different users and personas that use your application, and they're all going to have different journeys and different requirements, really. So we have to consider all that through the design of the product. So when you're designing a product, are you pretty much, how do you do that? Do you work on your own, doing your research, bringing it back to brainstorming with team? How do you make decisions? What do you do there?
The starting point for me is just an endless stream of thought. I've always...
Endless stream of thought, what does that mean?
Well, I never really stop thinking about the problems that I'm trying to solve. So, for me, I've found that my greatest ideas usually happen sitting on the couch in the evening staring through the TV because there's some junk on, or standing in the shower. And so I've never thought about work and life as something that needs to be balanced. For me, they're just kind of one and the same. I'm a technologist at heart. I love what I do. I love building technology. I love thinking about the future. I love thinking about technology and emerging industry and emerging tech. So for me, the start of the process is a little bit nebulous in that it's hard to define, but I guess I just have an overactive mind, and I'm thinking about this stuff a lot. From there, the start of the process is generally in isolation. I like to try and throw some things down onto paper, either quite literally scribbling them down or just jumping straight into a tool such as Sketch and trying to visualize some of my ideas.
So get it out of your head, basically.
Get it out of my head, yep. And that's really the part of the process where some real robust research starts to begin. Either competitor research or market analysis, or starting some of those lo-fi sort of usability testing methods which I talked about earlier. As soon as you've got anything, test it with somebody. Ask them what they think about them. Try and use it. Yes.
And in terms of test it with somebody, I think people get stuck on the case of, this is my idea, and we get it all the time. People come to us and say, please sign an NDA to look and help us. What do you think about that? Is it better just to put it out there? In reality, we're all in the same place. A lot of people have the same ideas and concepts. So do you think it's an advantage just to put it out there and tell people what you're up to, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, people become very, very protective of their ideas, but every idea is derivative. If you've thought of it, somebody else will, and maybe they already have.
Yeah, correct.
But I don't sign NDAs. If that's a prerequisite to have a conversation, I don't bother. And the bottom line is, if someone wants help or advice or guidance with an idea of theirs, it's their idea. They're the ones that are passionate about it. Even if I thought it was a good idea, I don't have the passion, and the passion is what's going to take it to true success, right? I could try and pinch their idea and hire some development guns off on the side and maybe build something similar. But if I don't really care, if it's not consuming me,
yes,
then my chances of beating that guy are basically nil anyway. So yeah, my advice to any entrepreneur that wants some early feedback on their ideas is to share them, because if they are genuinely passionate about it, if they're not just trying to flip something for a buck, and this is their obsession, then they're going to win.
Yep.
I think the obsession and going to win is very important here, because if you are out there looking to build something and it's just for $1, generally it's not going to work unless you get a little bit lucky along the way or find the right investor and build the right team. If you're not passionate, like you said, and willing to, you're jumping into no man's land in some reality here, where you're basically looking at a concept, an idea, how you're going to deliver this. You really have to be thinking about this, like you said, 24/7. Things pop into your mind. How are you going to do this? If you're just going to work a 9-to-5 job and attempt to build something and make an impact, especially the level of the Horizon State and Mogul and new technology, it's really never going to happen.
You'll struggle to get investment if you're just trying to flip something. They won't see the passion in you, and then why would they put money into you?
Well, look, it's surprising what people will invest in. I'm sure you'll find some investors who love that idea. But it's also a little bit naive in the sense that, and unless this seems just like a slam dunk, if there's any hard work involved in taking this idea to the point it can be flipped, and you don't have the people that are passionate actually about it to begin with, then it's always going to be a monumental challenge. You're pushing shit uphill.
Yeah, exactly.
But
shit uphill, exactly.
You thinking which idea is going to be a slam dunk isn't necessarily indicative of which one is.
Correct.
Or that's just your theory too.
Yep.
I think, and like you touched on it before, it can start at the problem rather than the concept. And I think you mentioned that with the Horizon State. You saw there was more of a problem that you're trying to solve rather than here's a piece of tech we are going to deliver to the market. And I think if you start there, you generally can get buy-in on the problem. And I think this is what this podcast is about. The buy-in on the problem is really about how do we help some non-techs actually build some better technology and get some insights and feedback from people. It's not about making $1. We're not making anything off doing this. It's more something passionate about sharing to the community about how to take the right steps to get your concept, your idea you're passionate about to market. So I think if you take a step back and just take the money off the table, is this something you want to be doing long term? You look at how you can monetize it in the future, or it might not be the first thing you think about. So when you look at a market, and you said you're looking at strategy, right? In terms of, are you approaching it in terms of the biggest problem you want to solve, or the people you want to help, or is it more about where I can get the most bang for buck? What are the big things there?
Look at holistically, philosophically, and Steve Jobs said it best. It's made ever popular over the internet. But you've got to start with the users and work your way back to the technology. Technical founders can often find themselves tripping up on having accidentally built something great or discovered a great way to do something.
Yeah, correct.
Or have put together a novel arrangement of technologies in a special kind of way.
Yep.
And then they end up trying to find a problem that can solve, which is actually a lot harder, right? But if
I think we've had that chat a bit before, so about what we're doing in one place. Yeah, it can happen.
Absolutely. So the benefit, and while being a non-technical founder in a digital product sphere is hugely challenging, because there's just so much to learn, so much you don't understand, and there's the opportunity to be taken for a run by people who aren't so nice.
Yes.
The benefit of being a non-technical founder who needs to or wants to build a digital product is that they usually do have a good problem to solve.
Yes.
And now they need to go off and think about how it can be solved using technology. So they actually are generally sometimes in a better starting position than the technical founder who just has some great technology and now wants to go and find a problem for that, right? Look, in terms of markets, I mean, do you want to quickly rephrase the question for me? Is it sort of the same thing, moving into those markets?
I'd say so. So it was more about how do we sort of pick, I think you've covered it there, so it's more about starting at the actual users themselves and the problem itself, rather than just here's some tech we want to build to solve a problem. I think, from a technical world, you can sort of get lost in that, and I think you've touched upon it really, the answer from a non-tech, there is your advantage. But how do you go about, so from your advantage can be a massive challenge. So you're coming from the other end, so you are a technical guy. Working with non-tech founders, how have you approached it just to probably close the chasm in terms of what they need to know, how do they need to do it, and what have you done there just to help them on that journey?
Look, I think a couple things to talk on there. You mentioned monetization earlier and thinking about how you take the product from user needs to a place of where it can grow and be commercially viable. And I think with digital product, especially if it's a consumer-facing digital product, more often than not, the right approach is to ensure you have the funding to reach a critical mass of users and almost not even think too deeply on exactly how you're going to charge those users or make money off of those users right now.
Okay.
With enough users, you can almost always, not always. You can almost always figure out a way to make money, but you need the users first. And most digital products struggle with this concept, especially when it comes to non-technical founders. I think non-technical founders who don't necessarily have an existing grasp on the realities in respect to building out a large, captive, sticky audience and network effects are in full swing and virality has taken its hold. A lot of the time, there might be too early a focus on revenues. And I would just suggest, and a lot of the time, it's through extensive, repetitive conversations that chasing early revenues is important for most early stage business owners because obviously they've sometimes got investors that expect to make a return.
Yes.
And their definition of what success looks like is usually monetary based. Even though the pursuit might not be driven by money, they've got a real problem and they've got a real solution for it, and it's their passion project. But fundamentally, it's a business, and we live in a capitalist society, right?
So to actually turn that into some profit, right?
Goalposts are dollar based, not user based.
Now, if we think about our faces for a moment as a revenue pie, looking at revenue opportunities too early can basically cut off the nose a little bit of revenue in spite of the rest of the face, which is the actual opportunity, right? It's the larger opportunity, and so it's really, really important that I think non-technical founders make sure that they're as comfortable with the idea as possible. That there's going to be a period of burning cash.
Yes.
On the path to success, when hopefully you turn a few important levers, and all of a sudden that money starts to rain. It's a tough balance, but taking money too early does a few things. One is what I just explained, which is that you create a scenario where you've potentially compromised long-term revenue for short-term revenue.
Yes.
And the other thing it does is put a value on your business basically immediately, which is actually not where you want to be in a digital product business. I mean, huge valuations aren't gotten to because you started charging users early and making revenue early. Huge valuations are assigned because you don't have revenue yet, and people are thinking about what the potential is.
How they can actually make some revenue out of this with a million users, for example. Interesting point. So what would you recommend? I'm a non-tech. Do I bootstrap this thing? Is that a better way to do this? To look for really early stage seeds? If I'm in that world, how have you approached it in the past? There's obviously a juggle there. As soon as you bring on, if it's reasonable cash and investment, you're clearly going to have pushback from investors, how we generate revenue, but that can, like you said, impact what you do now for the long term. So you might focus too short term. So it is a tough one to balance, but what have you done in the past? What have you found has worked, and what have you found really hasn't?
Look, a prototype beats a PowerPoint deck every day of the week if you're trying to raise capital or do anything really. Prototype obviously beats a PowerPoint deck in terms of actually getting feedback on the product and establishing an idea of product market fit. But I think the simplest, most important advice here is, ideally, bootstrap, get something working as fast as you can, even if it's super crude, because you need to validate that product market fit. If you go too far down the path and you've taken on a lot of money, then sometimes you're stuck trying to make things work, which you probably fundamentally shouldn't have or won't. And you're stuck in a very awkward position then, where you've continued to raise money without having really gotten it to the point of establishing product market fit first, and that's a really tough place for everybody involved in that sort of business relationship.
It's more
to be in.
Buying into the idea than the vision.
So, prototype, get it out to market, try and get some validation, and if that validation doesn't exist, then it's hard, but you kind of just have to cut your losses. Whether you've spent 30 grand or 300 grand standing up that minimum viable product. If there's no response, if the market is not saying we want this, we're going to use this, then there's, a sad reality is that you spend another 4 or 5 years trying to make something work, which just won't ever. And you could have been pursuing other great ideas in the meantime.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on an idea as an idea. There are many around, and I think if you take the learning from the past experience, it'll give you a good platform to move forward. I think we've talked about this a little bit. So Jamie was involved in advising us on a product which was fair access at the time, and I think the learning for us through that journey was we were attempting to find a market for a product. The idea was always perceived to be great, but never really found the right market fit. And we sort of got to that conclusion that, okay, maybe we need to park this, maybe not right timing, or it's not really answering the problems that we assumed it was. So definitely, it's a hard thing to do. You're in a position where you've got this concept, you've worked on it for a few years, jumped in, jumped out, looked at different markets, different opportunities. But what I found is as soon as we started trying to find a market for a product, take a step back, there's probably an issue here if you're trying to explore a market and find it.
In that scenario, we sort of had feedback, prototype worked well. The end users loved the idea, but there was no supplier who would get it to them.
There's no buyer.
Sometimes you can make it work. Sometimes you can define new categories. Sometimes new things happen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that path is infinitely harder. And as we sort of discussed earlier, if you've got great technology and you're trying to find a problem for it to solve, as I just said, sometimes that happens, but more often than not, that's just the infinitely harder path to track.
And then when the blockchain and all that bubble came along, we thought that's the perfect way to do it because we can crowdfund it up.
Yes.
But then we're just too late.
That market. But
and then
timing is wrong.
Timing.
If we were there a year earlier, it would have been a very different conversation. I think timing, you touched on it today, timing can impact the way you roll out a market. So, a couple of good points here. Timing, product market fit, I think people need to consider. In terms of, I'm a non-tech, I'm about to enter into this world. I could be in a business, I could be a founder of a business, I could be a domain knowledge expert. Where do I start? What do you perceive to start? Is it generally, I think you touched on it, do I get the information out of my head? Is that maybe where I might start? What do I do?
Yeah, I think we've sort of covered off that in a few ways through the conversation, but the 2 points really is getting it out of your head, moving as fast as you can towards even some very crude guerrilla sort of usability testing, pen on paper stuff. Get feedback, try to establish some perspective on product market fit early. Can you validate the idea? These sorts of things are critical, but in tandem, the theme of timing needs to again be a very conscious, deliberate part of that decision-making process. Is the world ready for it? Is the technology ready to support the idea? Is culture and society ready for it? Is consumer behavior ready for it? And I'll give you one really quick example. Back in 2007, I was beta testing a product called Qik, Q-I-K. This was a video streaming service, similar to Facebook Live, similar to Meerkat, similar to Periscope, which is now part of Twitter. So these streaming services, the first one of those that went to market in a meaningful way was Qik back in 2007. I was running, I think it was a Nokia N95, a Symbian Series 60 device at the time. I had 3G on that device, but most people were still on 2G. So data was super expensive.
Yeah, at that time, yes.
And so the idea that I would install the Qik app and live stream video to the world was actually, technologically, it was an amazing feat. It would stream to a web browser and it would be rendered as in a Flash player for somebody on the web, or lots of people on the web to view your stream. But cameras in phones weren't great, data was expensive, data was slow, and so that's an amazing example of something which has obviously become now very popular. People kind of take it for granted. But even just 14, 15 years ago, that era, the timing was wrong for a great idea. And again, reiterating Mark Andreessen's quote, all of the ideas from the .com boom and bust would have now worked. So timing and validation. You need to establish whether you honestly and be honest with yourself whether the timing is right from a technology perspective, from a culture perspective, and then you need to validate that idea with the market.
I think you said honest, but honest led by someone that's passionate can be sometimes a tough juggle there. So who would you reflect, and who have you done it in the past? Do you have the conversation with yourself, or do you theory that out with a few people and brainstorm it? How do you approach that? Because passion can sometimes take you down the wrong path.
Yeah. It's not. It's not going to be a particularly helpful answer.
Yeah,
but,
that's okay.
But sometimes you just need to make your own mistakes. You know, sometimes you can't learn something without having failed.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's become part of my personal discipline to think about those things as objectively and as critically as I can, because I failed in those areas in the past. You know, I've made those mistakes, and so weighing up your passion versus the honest appraisal of those two key factors, it can cloud your judgment.
Yes.
And you'll know soon enough if it has, because you'll have failed.
It could be as well how much conviction you have for the idea rather than the passion, because then it's, can you survive the feedback?
Correct.
And look, say, I believe this is going to work, doesn't matter what everyone else is telling me, and have it succeed, which has happened in the past.
Look, and I'm kind of using those terms interchangeably, but conviction is a terrific word for the point to make. The conviction is a prerequisite for success, but the conviction can also cloud your judgment in respect to those two things.
Yeah, not very, very good.
Now, in touching earlier with so you sort of said you have to assemble a great team like the Avengers and get your startup off the ground. So when you're starting up and you've got some prototyping done and the validations come across and everything's looking good, would you say get a team as quick as possible, or is it okay to start with some advisors to help you along the way till you're ready for that team?
Look, I'd say advisors can very often be superficial. If you can secure some high quality advisors, they can be immensely helpful. But in my experience, it's quite hit and miss. Advisors obviously are usually successful people building successful stuff elsewhere, so their time is limited. And sometimes they're just not the right advisors either. So look, I'm not saying don't try and build out an advisory board to help you, but the value that they can add, well, you know, mileage may vary. That's the bottom line.
So an example we've seen a few times with the non-tech startups is they engage with a development team. They have no idea what the team's telling them. It's going all over their head. And we advise them to get an advisor that's an intermediary that can help them explain what the team's doing to help them.
The translation stuff is massively useful because, especially for non-technical founders, you know, bringing on engineers or working with an outsourced engineering team, there's a language barrier there. There really is.
And you need a translator. Japanese sometimes.
Correct.
Yeah, it's the other way around.
And so, you know, in a perfect world, that non-technical founder has a technical founder with them who they trust and can rely on to make sure that they become that conduit for a better understanding. Where that hasn't happened yet, then absolutely you need somebody there in an advisory capacity to help you have those conversations, because the outcomes otherwise are never good. They're just never good.
We've seen too many stories go down the wrong path that way.
Yeah, that's the whole point of why we're doing this. It's just to keep people on track to things to consider. And we've mentioned quite a number of them today. So I think, Jamie, we might wrap it up there. I think that's been a really good chat looking at how the startup world has treated you, how you've taken ideas and concepts and delivered them, and now what you're doing with Mogul, and in terms of building that team and capability and trying to deliver out some new tech again there. So commend you for putting yourself out there and trying to impact the markets in different ways. So yeah, congrats on that, and hopefully that journey works well for you. In terms of yourself, how do people find out about you and touch base if they're interested in reaching out?
I'm on Twitter all the time. I'm
Twitter's
on it. So just at me. It's at Jamie Skella. Skella. Happy to have a yarn on Twitter, or catch up for a coffee or a beer at my esports bar. I just thought I'd throw that plug in right at the end.
Esports
throw that in.
Nice. Where's that located?
93 Queen Street. So it's Australia's first esports bar.
Aaron in the office, a guy in the office has visited it a few times.
Oh, brilliant.
There you go. Has he? Is that the one? Yeah, nice. Nice work. No, thanks again, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for that.
Cheers, mate.